while we're on leaders, there was an interesting piece in the News Corp Sunday papers today by James Campbell, who asks whether Anthony Albanese's age could soon become an election issue. He points out that when John Howard turned 61, the same age that Albo is now, quote, no one thought it odd speculation turned to when he might consider calling it a day. And in response to the speculation, Howard said he'd think about it when I'm 64, of course, referencing the Beatles song. So far, Albanese hasn't faced the same level of speculation, and Campbell asks whether some of this is down to the image the PM has cultivated, including his musical tastes, and sort of, makes him seem a bit more like a Gen Xer. And can you believe that when you go through the list of Australian PMs by age when they took office, number one being the oldest, Albanese ranks 6th. But if we go to an election next year, it's likely he'll be 62 by then, which would make him 65 by the end of his next term, and God forbid if he ran again and won, he'd be 68 by the end of that one. Now, of course, Kel, you look to the US, and it is a stark difference because we've got two blokes pushing 80 or over 80 running for president over there. But when you think the oldest a serving PM has ever been in this country is 71, yes, and that was Menzies. Shortly after he turned 71, he left. And I think it was John McEwen became Prime Minister at the age of 67. But the issue here is, you rarely have a Prime Minister who gets to that sort of age and continues to serve. So you start to ask the question, if Albanese goes to the next election and wins, is it a possibility that he might stand down at some point during the next term and clear the way for someone else to come through? And does that enter the mind of the voter?
And of course it doesn't. And James Campbell was writing a very clever, very funny column. Now, part of what's happened is the place of 60-year-olds in our society has changed. My friend Alec, who is quite elderly and in a retirement village, complains about the rowdy 60-year-olds running around the place.
Those youths!
So the age doesn't come into it. I think behind all of this is the idea that Albanese clearly has a problem. But his problem is the Peter principle, not his age. His age, and even in America, it's not age, because Trump is clearly sharper than Biden.
Yes.
Biden is not in trouble because he's 81. Biden is in trouble because he's got dementia. That's what the problem is. It's a medical problem, not an age problem. On behalf of all of the older people watching, it's not an age problem.
Though to be fair,
it's a dementia problem.
But to be fair, a blancmange is sharper than Joe Biden. I think it would be fair.
Gum trees sharper than Joe Biden.
That's quite true.
So age is simply not an issue. It simply doesn't matter. He's got a problem. His problem is the Peter principle. Lawrence J. Peter, who invented the Peter principle back in 1969, people are promoted to their level of incompetence. Clearly, this man he looked really good in every other job, so he got promoted to a job he can't do. He can't do it. That's the problem. Age doesn't come into it.
Maybe his problem is he hasn't got any problems, and so people just keep having to plucking at thin air to try to throw something at him, because maybe he's not doing as badly as everyone or all his enemies.
He doesn't have a problem. He doesn't have Andrew Giles on his front page. He doesn't have a problem.
That is definitely a problem. I'll grant you that. But again, I just see all these reports across all the media saying, Anthony Albanese is turning 62. Might be old. And again, there's a lot of tongue and a lot of cheek in James Campbell's piece. But again, when you've got two geriatrics running against each other, or one geriatric and one madman running against each other in the US, to think that Albo's age 2 decades younger is any kind of issue is literally laughable. And again, I often read these pieces say, Albo's budget has, fallen flat and it's is in terminal decline. And then I look at Newspoll and it's 48.52 and I think, huh? That's like, and again, I don't want people to be overconfident on Labor's side. And
there's another year to go.
Yeah, sure, there's another year to go. But again, to be at 52 after the result he got at the election, 2 years into his first term in the middle of an economic crisis, if that is dead in the water,
fraud, Joe.
then
fraud.
Voter fraud. That's right.
I think we have to accept too that it's a different time to when Howard was in power.
Yeah.
They say 40s are the new 30s and 50s are the new 40s, and I'm completely sticking by that, by the way. I am.
But I hope that doesn't mean that the 20s is the new 10s, because I'm in a bit of trouble. If that's the case, I can't be that young, otherwise they wouldn't let me on the telly. But it's interesting, though. I look at the US all the time, Evelyn, and I think, how do you get to the point where the two blokes who are running for president are that old? Because it just doesn't happen here. We would never have a Prime Minister in this country who was 81, sorry. It just would never, ever happen. Why does it happen in the US?
I think that the US, although, like, you know, you have that saying that, you know, we're their little brother. When America gets a cold, we cough over here. Like, that is true to some degree. But I actually think we're very, very fundamentally different nations. And I think that's why we saw how differently we responded to COVID to America. I think America was built on the basis of freedom. And I think Australia, we have this convict mentality, this curse where it's like the government has given us everything and so we have to wait for them to tell us. So I think we value security over freedom. So I think very fundamentally we're very different, and so they're running very different races. We need security over here, which is perhaps why we like someone younger. We feel a bit more secure with that. And, you know, to be honest, I think culturally speaking, we have a real problem where we don't view people beyond what we see, either it be their colour, their sex, their gender or their age. It's like that's the only lens we can see people through, as opposed to character, quality, capability. And I think if you get rid of this whole identity politics and you just look at those three things, you know, we'll be a lot better off. But yeah, I think fundamentally, America very different to us. And
America also very deliberately, both culturally and specifically politically, venerates age.
Yeah.
It refers to, of course, its founding fathers as the architects of the state itself. There are two criteria to actually run for president. One is you have to be born in America. You can't be a naturalised citizen. The other is you have to be over 42 years of age. So you can't even run as a 40-year-old. If 50s are the new 40, as 40, you are legally barred from running as president because they thought, well, you're just not old enough. You do not have enough real-world experience. And the other thing, of course, is to even get to the position of being able to run for president with the slightest amount of credibility, you have to be so senior in the government that it often, if not almost always, requires decades of public service. So,
I don't see a problem with that, though, to be honest. A part of me thinks that some of these old fuddy-duddies should move aside. Like, I actually, like, if I was in America right now, heading into the election, I would vote Trump over Biden. Like, any day. But to be honest, I think there are far better candidates than Trump who would be a far better conservative president who would do better. But it's just impossible for them to get through because there's just this tug of war between these two parties.
Can I say, Joe's right that they do respect age in America. When Reagan ran, he was much younger than these two guys, but he was still the oldest candidate to ever run for president. And there was the famous debate he had with Walter Mondale. And they said, what do you think about the issue of age? And Reagan said, I'm not going to hold my opponent's youth against him.
Right. So, and look, you know, the record in Australia is set at 71. So, Albo, if you think you can make it another 3 terms, maybe you can break